The sales are in and the results are decisive. Pikmin, a series never famous for outsized sales numbers, has hit in Japan and hit big. While Pikmin 4's international sales have moved at a good clip, reaching 3.33 million by the end of 2023, this is disproportionately carried by the Japanese market, which accounted for more than 1.8 million units. Nintendo usually figures on a quite different split, with Shigeru Miyamoto once quoting its baseline sales expectations as being around 300,000 copies in Japan and 2 million including the international market. If you scale the success proportionate to the size of its market, this is like Pikmin being a 10 million seller on the international scene. And while some franchises, Splatoon being another, have always burned brightest in the land of the rising sun, what are the specific reasons that Miyamoto's Mini-Minions have become quite this big in the East? It didn't happen purely by accident, and we're going to explore the key reasons why it did. The first key aspect is advertising. Nintendo of Japan's YouTube channel shows a slew of different advertisements, one for each of the major sections of the game, featuring gameplay footage. Many of these include highly produced and aspirational scenes with real actors integrated with the Pikmin. There were also short advertisements, and Go Nintendo has sightings of a billboard advertisement for Japan spotlighting the cameo for the popular in Japan Game Boy Advance SP console. What's striking is that in the 2023 holiday season, Pikmin 4 was still receiving a huge push. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, by all accounts a game that should be Nintendo's jewel in the crown title of the year, has one additional advertisement on the Japanese YouTube channel showing how to build a car in the game, but doesn't appear to have exactly dominated the charts during the holiday quarter. In fact, Zelda has always had somewhat more success outside Japan than within it, and so while it's still a popular title, the advertising focus has definitely been geared towards Pikmin in Japan. Of course, the US was not without copyright competitors. Indeed, a group of fans themselves decided to pull together to put the pint-sized pioneers into Times Square, and actually succeeded. Still, while Pikmin fans of New York got to see Bulborb gazing down from on high, this was some way short of a major push from Doug Bowser's Nintendo of America team. There were advertisements issued for Pikmin, although I'm not sure the advertisements in question hit quite the same aspirational high notes as Japan's, where people going about their day-to-day lives walked into that tiny world, and I would love to know exactly what the strategic thinking was. Whether the Japanese advertisements are better or worse is something for individuals to judge, and frankly even then you'd need granular sales data to really tease out the effectiveness within the target market of the two different advertising strategies. One thing we can say is that Pikmin in Japan was advertised more and for longer, and apparently with a greater return on investment. And points also have to be given to the Japanese team for creativity. Have you ever thought to yourself as the pangs of hunger strike, if only this moment I could eat a Pikmin themed sandwich? Well, if you popped into Family Mart in Japan last July, they had you covered with these rather interesting looking flavours. The ones on the left are shrimp and broccoli on plain bread, while the one on the right contains 4 kinds of fruit in a sandwich: tangerine, kiwi, pineapple and yellow peach, identified as 4 fruits that the Pikmin like to explore. Having never personally sampled the culinary wonders of fruit sandwiches, I have to say that I am at least a little intrigued, although fruit sandos are not unusual in Japan, having started as a niche product for coffee shops and specialty cafes in the 1920s, and grown to be more dramatic in recent years, often with larger and more obviously decorative and colourful pieces of fruit. Setting sandwiches aside, the relative endurance of Pikmin can be seen in regional differences in search term trends, with Japanese searches maintaining a high rate throughout the year. And there was good reason. Pikmin Bloom, which vanished almost without a trace in the rest of the world, continues to be supported in Japan, with October 2023 seeing exclusive new fortune decor Pikmin being added. These would be found in the regions of shrines and temples with paper hats on their heads. As Pikmin Bloom's site says, physical omikuji can typically be purchased at a place of worship for a small fee, and they indicate your overall luck, as well as more detailed information about your luck in areas such as love, health, money, and many others. They're usually written in Japanese, but some popular shrines and temples also offer omikuji papers in English. There's still a regular drip of new community events for Pikmin Bloom, and challenges linked particularly to Japanese regions, Japanese food, and Japanese calendar events. While Pikmin Bloom is notionally a global app, there is no doubt about it, it is mainly focused on the market in Japan. You might say with a wistful sigh and a wise twinkle in your eye, "Ah, but 'twas ever thus." You might say that Pikmin was just always a decent Japanese hit doomed to obscurity in the West, but actually it wasn't always a Japanese juggernaut. In fact, Pikmin 4 sold more in its first week on the market than Pikmin 1, 2 and 3 combined in Japan. Pikmin 4 sold 401,853 units in its first week, compared to the game's previous sales shown on screen. Granted, the initial play base of the late-era Switch was massively larger than the player base of any previous console, which doubtless helped, but these only account for physical copies of the game. The international physical-digital split has been quoted in the past as being around 55 to 45. Now granted, Japan is known to be a market that generally prefers their media physical, and so the proportion of Pikmin 4 sales bought digitally might not be quite as high as 45%. Even if the ratio was, say, 2 to 1 in favour of physical, this gives Pikmin 4 a big sales boost that will put it closer to double the number of the combined sales legacy of the previous 3 games. Also, I think it's worth crediting the team themselves for deliberately trying to shepherd the franchise in a new direction. The developer interview with Shigeru Miyamoto and the Pikmin team even has them drawing comparisons to the groundbreaking approach to Breath of the Wild from the Zelda team, with EPD10 head Yuji Kando saying, "It's similar to the Legend of Zelda series, breaking the conventions, but just as in that series, we thought it would be better to leave it up to the players in which order they encounter Pikmin in, rather than having the game decide for them. This thought shaped the elements of Dandori, and players are now free to try out their own ideas, like using ice Pikmin in certain areas to get the job done faster." The concept of Dandori may require some explanation in the West, but the idea is well established in Japan, and while it was a new concept for how to explain the gameplay in Pikmin 3, in Pikmin 4, it has been a great marketing focus and brings a level of clarity to the gameplay mechanics that might have eluded the marketing previously. Another area addressed by the developers as something responsible for Pikmin 4's great success is the difficulty. In fact, Shigeru Miyamoto explained this directly. He said, "There have been 3 games in the series until now, from Pikmin to Pikmin 3, and personally I've always wondered, why haven't they exploded more in sales even though they're so much fun to play? Why do people think they're so difficult? I get that people find it more difficult when death is a factor, but I think the franchise's strength lies in its relationship with mortality. If something is irreversible, you need to figure out a way to prevent undesired things from happening. To try to prevent Pikmin from dying, you need to practice Dandori. To me, that's what makes this game unique. I think people find Pikmin difficult for 2 reasons, the control and the depth of gameplay. I spent a long time mulling over how we could convey these points as interesting rather than difficult. Changing the perception of this being a game with punishing challenges to a game that could really engage people as interesting certainly changed the tone of Pikmin 4, and seems to have come from studying players. Yuji Kando noted that they looked at players' reactions to the first 3 games and said, "I've also thought really hard about how to get more people to play this game. In the early stages of development, we prioritized ease of play and experimented with making the controls easy enough for those who aren't used to playing games. We also tested improvements to the camera and AI. Also, it just doesn't feel like a Pikmin game to me if it's not like the first one. That is, if it doesn't have this Dandori element where players learn and become more efficient through repetition." Ultimately, the team managed to keep the essential Dandori features but still make a game that reached out beyond their core player base. So, what do we ultimately put Pikmin 4's Japanese success down to? Clearly the game was well made, ambitious and thoughtfully designed to respond to previous concerns, particularly around difficulty. Plus, the clarity of the Dandori message made particular sense in Nintendo's native country. Added in were heavy amounts of advertising and advertisements focusing on the aspirational and funny elements of these tiny Pikmin in people's day-to-day lives. Furthermore, the use of mobile was clearly much more effective in Japan than elsewhere, with Pikmin Bloom keeping people engaged with the concept of Pikmin. I think the key here is that Pikmin is a Japanese-centric game, and Nintendo knows the Japanese market very well. They know their business relies on the success of international hits like Zelda, and Zelda does well in Japan, even if it's not quite as big as it is in the West, but that's not to say there isn't value in flexing their muscles on chiefly Japanese fare. Remember Shigeru Miyamoto's comments from a 2015 investor Q&A where he talked about sales expectations. He said then, "Our basic premise is to create software that will sell in the range of at least 2 million units. We simply couldn't recoup our costs if we only released games in Japan that had sales of around 300,000 units, so the global market is our standard." The standard? Yes, but there are always exceptions to the rule, and when the tiny Pikmin has served up by now almost certainly 2 million in sales of the Land of the Rising Sun alone, it can be considered to have met its expectations very comfortably. But can the same lessons be applied to promote it outside of Japan? For one reason or another, there does seem to be some regional variation in how franchises are received in different territories. We know that Metroid's home territory sales have never lit the world on fire, and perhaps the same is true of Pikmin in reverse. Pikmin Bloom doesn't appear to have blossomed in quite the same way abroad, and it's hard to see it having the same traction outside of Japan. The game is popular, but not exactly world-beating. Pikmin 3 Deluxe has already gone out of print in America, which on the one hand suggests that they're not trying to keep pushing it to any great degree, but on the other hand suggests that it at least met the sales expectations they had for it when they decided on how many editions they were going to print in the first place. And I just can't see Pikmin sandwiches becoming a thing to inspire Pikmin-loving picnic goers. One area where Pikmin did notably break out is at the 2023 Game Awards, where it took home the prize for Best Strategy Game. I'll forgive it for beating out Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, given that game was a remake, and I do think it deserved the nod over Fire Emblem Engage, even though I also love that game. How much of the Game Awards changed the needle on game awareness, I'm not quite sure, but I think it's to Nintendo's benefit to be seen as making prestige, high-quality titles, even if those titles don't always sell in the short term. After all, if we go by the Miyamoto precept that a good game is good forever, in theory, that game is capable of selling forever, and Nintendo has always been good at leveraging older titles in the longer term. Another source of international success of Pikmin could be through the movies. The first Super Mario Bros. Movie did give an appropriately small-sized cameo to the Pikmin. I would guess licensing issues might preclude more than cameos appearing anytime soon. It would be financially imprudent for the Super Mario Bros. Franchise to swallow up Pikmin, which could be a separate legal concern in its own right. But I could see slightly more blatant cameos and appearances inching their way forward, as they did in Super Mario World, where sharp-eyed tourists spotted the little Pikmin. It's an oddly appropriate use of the characters for them to be present, but just slightly out of sight. Thankfully, however, I don't think Pikmin needs its international reception to be top tier for it to continue to thrive. Even if the mighty Pikmin 4 didn't shift quite the same numbers outside Japan, hopefully its success still bodes very well for Pikmin's future, and in this video up here, I go into greater depth on why Pikmin 5 could still be in development even as we speak. Check it out here, or otherwise, why not try one of the other videos on screen? As ever, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon for another Nintendo Forecast.